And you know, all these idiots, they come in here and they say, oh, you know, if you have the hat, it's enough. They can't give you Havana syndrome if you got the hat on because the hat will reflect the microwave frequencies. No, sorry, you still have your lymph nodes, you still have your lymphatic system, your carotid arteries. And where do they go? The brain, dude. The god brain. And that's how they can still get you. They throw the frequencies at you, it gets in your bloodstream, and then your bloodstream starts vibrating at this frequency, and it starts disrupting your brain in this kind of way. People don't think about this stuff. I only know about it because it was revealed to me by a burning bush on a mountain. But listen, I realize not everyone has a burning bush on a mountain, so that's why I'm so happy to be sponsored today by Ground News. Ground News is news, well, it's not exactly news. Ground News is, they sponsor a lot of YouTube videos. I'm sure you've heard about it. Ground News is, Ground News is, let me just ignore the laptop. Ground News can help you cut through the noise by gathering over 50,000 sources and giving you the tools to see through the distractions and understand any potential bias. Take insert news story here. You can see it has over 100 sources, and you can see the liberal media frames it like this, while conservative media frames it like this. On Ground News, you can view these interpretations side by side, and you can trace who owns each outlet, how reliable the reporting is, and where its bias falls.
And so I don't know what newspaper you're reading.
So you might not know this from listening to the ads for Ground News, but Ground News is not a news site. It is a news aggregation site. It is a news site in the same way Reddit is a news site. What they do is they scrape the web for all of these news stories. They do some basic programming to couple them all together, and then they feed them all to an LLM. I mean, if I had to guess, based on the way it's written, I'm gonna say ChatGPT, and ChatGPT writes 4 bullet points. They want you to pay for an AI summary, essentially. They also have it separated based on whether the media was coded either left-wing, right-wing, or centrist. Like, this is what you're paying for, right? ChatGPT, tell me the news. Neutral bias, 4 bullet points or less. Oh, war in Iran. Crazy. ChatGPT, what's the strongest monkey? Probably the thing that Ground News is most proud of is their blind spot page. Their blind spot page shows you stories that have been reported from either the right or the left with disproportionate coverage, with the condition that at least a third of them have a factuality rating above very poor. Wait. Does that mean on the blind spot page, there are still stories where over half of the sources have low factuality? Yes. Now get out of your goddamn bubble. But how do you know it's factual? How do I know which one's real or not? So in the same way that the news reporting and summaries are largely just regurgitating other people's work, I'm sorry to say so too are the factuality and the bias reports. So the factuality and bias reports are actually just scrapes from other sites as well. Media Bias Fact Check, All Sides, and Ed Fonte's Media.
Here's quite literally the exact source they use for Ed Fonte's, All Sides Media Bias, and Media Bias Fact Check.
Media Bias Fact Check, which uses real people to fact check all of these things, is not profitable. But Ground News is, and that feels like a very tenuous relationship. They actually have people going in and fact checking all of these claims. Ground News just takes these factualities, averages them together, and then paywalls it for you. I also need to express how funny it is when Harleen Kaur, who is the founder, talks about this as a perk.
Is it from one source, or again, is that cross-referenced?
Again, it's from a cluster of sources. Again, trying to be as neutral and as close to objectivity as we possibly can be. Close to objectivity.
As if the bias that you bring when you're checking a source is something that can be averaged out, right? As if it's just a random noise. As if there's no systemic biases in the media for one position or the other. It also just happens to be the fact that it's much easier and cheaper to scrape other people's work and sell it as your own, you know? And that is to say, I'm not very impressed with the product that Ground News has to offer. Objectivity. Despite the snark or whatever, I think Ground News is doing something that is resonant with the American people. I think they've identified a real problem in political partisanship. It's no secret that people all over America seem to distrust the news because they assume that there's some kind of bias that's not showing them the full story. This is especially true on the right wing for some reason.
You are fake news.
CNN, fake.
We are fighting the fake news.
With the fake news and all of that.
Scott, look at all of that fake news.
Fake, disgusting news. The news is fake. So I don't know what newspaper you're reading.
And I've also experienced this with my own parents who are extreme, like MAGA Republicans, huge Trump supporters. If I try to fact check them on anything and they don't like what I find, the first thing they ask, oh, where'd you get that from? Oh, the New York Times? Oh, AP News? They're all biased. They're all biased.
So I don't know what newspaper you're reading.
They use the idea of bias almost as a thought-terminating cliche, an uber explanation for everything that disagrees with them. And I can't help but think, if they had a site like Ground News and they could compare the different sources, they could start to rebuild their trust in other media when they see that largely its reporting is all very similar. We as a country have gotten more polarized than ever, and it does often feel like the bubbles have gotten so insulated we don't know how the other half lives, what they talk about, what they think is happening. It truly is a maddening situation. What websites like Ground News and Media Bias Fact Check and All Sides are concerned with is how to break out of this bubble. How can we see what the other half is seeing? Is there a way to open our worldview?
I would never go and open something like Breitbart personally because I would find it very uncomfortable. But having the same story available from Breitbart's perspective right there, if you read that article, then if you run across somebody in real life and it's coming from that point of view, at least you can have that conversation with them.
They're trying to reduce the bias, you know? At least that's what I would say. I can't help but feel that Ground News et al. Is missing some very basic understanding of political polarization in this situation. The founder, Harlan Cower, often brags about how she was once a NASA engineer.
I moved on and I was lucky enough to work for NASA, every space engineer's dream.
It is this kind of expertise and intelligence that she's bringing to this problem that's never had it before. She's an outsider coming in. However, as someone who works in an academic area, I know firsthand that someone talking outside of their area of expertise is almost always untrustworthy. Here's a very clear example. I am in the kind of sphere of radiology, right? And there's this big conference that people like to go to called SCCT, which is the Society for Cardiovascular CT. One of the main ways that we measure coronary artery calcium is through something called the aggregation score. And everyone uses it, so he's kind of a big name at the event. He also wrote a book called The South Beach Diet. And he's using his expertise as someone who works in cardiology as a means to sell this book. But when you read it, you realize that this man actually doesn't know shit about nutrition. It's a no-sugar diet, and his idea that you shouldn't eat fruits because they have a lot of sugar is bad. Like, that's bad nutrition advice. The radiologists and the cardiologists have to go up there and they have to pretend like, oh, you know what? South Beach Diet book, that changed my life. No, it didn't. We don't have to praise this man for shit that he did badly. Anyway, sorry, rant over. I'm not talking about that. That's all to say, like, I see this all the time, especially with doctors and scientists. People who talk outside of their areas often don't know shit about what they're talking about. It is exactly Harlene's lack of experience in knowledge of political science and sociology that makes me wonder if she understands political polarization at all, if this is her stated goal, because there's just so many glaring holes in her implied argument. The first and foremost of that is, one, no one reads the news. The way that we, the American public, learn about the news is usually from other people talking about it. It is from watching Hassan or political streamers or people you know on Blue Sky or Twitter or whatever, chirping about some thing happening. Hi, I'm here with my editing co-chair. We're going through the footage and I wanted to expand on this point just very, very slightly. So it seems almost obvious, right, to anyone who knows anything about political opinions that most people get their political opinions from political commentators. This is people like
Hasana B. This is like Pod Save America. This is like Candace Owens. This is like Tucker Carlson. Like, these are the people, these are the movers and shakers of political opinion and political discourse. These people are not included in ground news at all. Their opinion sections do not make the cut, because these are not things that you can group together and, compare the spin on, because people are not writing opinions about the same thing. That's kind of the whole point. Even internally, inside of a specific news organization, how much sway do opinions have over reporting? And what I found is that when I went into the New York Times, I scraped around 10 stories from the opinion section, the world section, and the US news section to see relatively, we don't know how many views, but relatively how many comments each of these sections were getting. And what I found is that US politics, 50 about. If the story goes viral, it can have 1,000. World, same thing, 50 to 80. That's pretty typical. Opinion section, 300, 350. That's pretty typical. So what we're seeing is kind of like a 6-fold increase in engagement in the opinion section. So if there is bias that's being introduced, and there is bias you want to take account of, you would think you wouldn't ignore the biggest part, the most important part of bias, right? Where people are getting their news, right? That's not even on ground news. And that's not even to mention the second point. She assumes that bias only comes from framing. That's wrong. The majority of bias is in frequency. The idea is that if you were to read all of the articles, you would have a perfect view, because everyone has their own framing, and by comparing them, you can see where one lacks and the other shines. That's wrong. If Republicans go on TV and they talk about a migrant crisis constantly, when there is no statistical evidence for it happening, by harping on very specific situations that happen occasionally, you're going to start to get the impression that there's a lot of migrant crime happening when the statistics show us the opposite. It is this implied argument. And what does ground news do to contextualize the frequency of these stories? Nothing. She seemed not to even realize this at first.
One thing that we stumbled upon, to be honest, I did not set out to do, was it's not necessarily the spin on the coverage, it's the lack of coverage completely. That tells the bias of the outlet
That's a whole
as
other
well.
thing.
Yeah.
The fact that you can just kind of constantly talk about a topic and turn it into a national debate seemed to completely evade her. Like, this is so obviously the source of political bias. It is just repeatedly saying something. My next point is that it flattens a lot of outsider voices in the party. There were tons of people talking about the genocide that was happening in Gaza, the devastation that was happening, the insanity of it, but they weren't reporting on it because the media has a specific bias towards normalcy in American foreign politics. And the normalcy bias in American politics is to side with Israel unilaterally. The fact that there's a huge diversity of opinion that is not captured in this right-left comparison. Probably the last point, you can be biased. You can hate the fact that it's so hard to connect with people and still maintain beliefs. I say this as someone who is a vegan. I have a point of view that if there are small changes that you can make to improve the lives of animals, you should take it. I think morally that's right. But I'm not deluded into believing everyone has this same morality. That's my own personal morality system. Just because there is an argument about whether or not veganism is good or bad, I'm not going to pretend like the argument has any validity to me. I have a moral system. I know where I stand on this. You can still have beliefs and not like the polarization, right? One of the implicit arguments that ground news is making, some of the bias that it introduces by framing issues as right and left, is that the center is the truest point.
Close to objectivity.
And you want to know how I know all of these points are salient? Do you want to know how I know that Harleen knows that her product doesn't do anything? Do you want to know why I think I'm so right about this? Because ground news partnered with this guy at Duke University to do a study on their Spotlight newsletter. They wanted to see specifically if exposing people to stories that are counter to their political bias could help change their mind. And the way Harleen tells it, it worked.
Or go to whoever.
Got it.
But yeah, we see that. We actually had a researcher from Duke University who did research on ground news and found out that people's opinions can actually be changed if they are presented with counter to what their beliefs are. So we really think that's got to be the way that we can bring everybody back to the same page, back to common ground.
This is very helpful.
So what they did in this study is pretty straightforward, right? They have 4 topics that they chose. This is in 2021, mind you. So the 4 topics they chose are vaccine misinformation, Russian interference in the election, 2020 election, Cuban refugees coming to America, and lab leak theory. These are the 4 topics that they chose beforehand. So what they did is they sent out this newsletter to people. Around 2,000 people responded, something like that. And then that week, when they send it, they specifically pick out news stories about these 4 topics. And after that, they take a follow-up survey. In these surveys, they ask about political polarization, namely, how different do you think your party's position is from the opposite parties? How much do you approve of the other party's handling of this crisis? And lastly, what is your actual position on this issue? And they compare the response from people who are registered as Republican and Democrat and Independent. They do basic checks to make sure they open the emails, stuff like this. And I'm just going to read from the paper. Despite the seemingly high political stakes surrounding Russian election interference, the lab leak hypothesis, and vaccine misinformation, information on these issues did not appear to sway opinions in this study. Information on these issues did not sway people's opinions in this study. Their polarization didn't change, their approval of the opposite party didn't change, and their positions did not change from seeing opposite news stories at all. The one that did have some kind of change, the whole reason they wrote this paper was because of the Cuban refugee story. So what happened is in 2021, Joe Biden denied access for Cuban refugees trying to come by sea. And believe it or not, Democrats were like, oh, okay, maybe the Democratic position is not as far away from Republicans as we thought. The reason they probably thought that is because Joe Biden had campaigned on being more open to immigrants. So then when he does something in the opposite, you think, okay, yeah, it makes sense that most people would be like, okay, maybe Democrats and Republicans aren't that different. But their actual policy beliefs didn't change, right? Does that really indicate a change of heart? And then for Republicans, this is the really big finding, the fact that it could change people's policy. To the question, to what extent do you oppose or favor restricting entry for Cuban refugees attempting to come to America by sea? Republicans went from mostly neither oppose nor support, i.e. they don't care, to they oppose very slightly. Is this a meaningful change? And mind you, this is in people who want to change. This is people who subscribe to ground news. If their political opinions on the whole aren't changing, if on the whole their political opinions aren't changing, if they don't feel any closer to the other side, if they don't feel like they've reduced their bias, then maybe this doesn't work. And this is brought up as a limitation in the paper. Quote, a limitation of this experiment is that results focus exclusively on policy issues. Scholars investigating contemporary politics debates whether polarization has its roots in ideological or identity-based foundations. In accordance with this, recent research reveals that warm personal relations between political leaders can reduce partisan hostility, while policy compromise does not have that same effect. Warm personal relationships across the aisle reduce political hostility. Compromise legislation does not. Hey, I'm talking to the Democrats right now. People don't want you to compromise. People want you to have a strong moral center, but they want you to be nice and likable. How are they neither of those things? Anyway, sorry. If only there was someone like the mayor of New York who is both personally very, very likable, but also has a strong moral center, who doesn't compromise on his ideas. That's exactly what I saw. Prior to the race in New York, they were talking about Zohran Mamdani the same way they talked about him on Fox News. They said he was crazy, that he was wild, he was going to destroy the city forever. It would never be the same. after he wins, he has a meeting with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is nice to them. They have warm personal relationships. I talk to my parents. What do they say? I like that guy. He's cool. He's cool with me. It's vibes. But here's the really interesting thing from that study. The people who subscribe to ground news feel less biased. They feel like they're more aware, even if they're not actually more aware, even if they're not nearly less polarized, they feel like they're less polarized. And I think that's the whole point, you know? In capitalism, it's so much more useful to sell identity than it is to sell a successful product. If we make a strong product that solves a problem, the problem goes away and you never have to buy anything ever again. But if you sell this identity of someone working towards a problem, you never actually need to solve that problem because you still need that identity. As long as that problem never gets solved, you can always sell your product. As long as you are not actually reducing political polarization, you can sell a product about reducing political polarization. And the crazy thing is, ground news wasn't always like this. You know, ground news came to be like this as a means of being profitable. Previous to this, it was a program that would scrape social media sites like Twitter or Snapchat or whatever and try to find stories that people were talking about that major news hadn't actually started reporting on. And then it would send notifications to people in the area to deny or confirm stories, hence ground news, as in on the ground news.
That's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Now this seems incredibly useful. It seems great. It'd be nice to know, but it doesn't sound very profitable, you know, having to pay people to go out, right? The kind of natural language processing you have to do to pull together stories from tweets is much more difficult than it is doing it on news articles, which are made for SEO, right? And that's why I think ground news sucks. If you want to know what conservatives are talking about, just go to where conservatives hang out and listen to what they're talking about. What are their talking points? It's actually not that hard to find these places. Anyway, that's it. That's the video. I just wanted to do a quick video because I'm in the middle of writing a script for a video about drug addiction, which I think is a fascinating topic, especially people who are addicted and homeless. And I think that's going to be the topic of the next video, hopefully in a month or two. Anyway, that's all I got. If you liked the video, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. And if you didn't like the video, I don't care. You definitely didn't watch to the end. I would be shocked if you didn't like the video, if you would watch to the end. Anyway, that's about it.